Picture this. A city that shimmered with temples plated in gold, palaces rising above a sparkling lake, and markets overflowing with exotic goods. The capital of the Aztec Empire was a wonder of the world, greater in size than most European cities of its time. Bernal Díaz del Castillo, one of Cortés' soldiers, described it. With awe, it was like enchantment, towers and temples rising from the water. So many things to see that we did not know where to begin. Yet behind this dazzling facade lay one of the darkest regimes in human history. The splendor was built on rivers of blood, on human sacrifice at a scale so grotesque that entire peoples lived in terror of being captured, slaughtered, and even consumed. The Aztecs did not simply rule, they terrorized, feeding their empire with flesh. When a few hundred Spaniards arrived in 1519, they did not face the Aztecs alone. Thousands of indigenous peoples, weary of centuries of slaughter, seized the chance to unite with the Spaniards and end the nightmare that had haunted them for generations. The Aztec Empire thrived on institutionalized violence. War itself was not waged to conquer new lands, but to capture living bodies for sacrifice. The infamous Flower Wars were fought specifically to gather prisoners for the altars of, and what awaited those captives was horrifying. During great festivals such as the rededication of the Templo Mayor in 1487, tens of thousands of prisoners were sacrificed in a single ceremony. Imagine the scene. The plazas overflowing with bound victims, dragged from conquered cities. Priests painted black and smeared with dried blood, waiting at the temple's summit, and the thundering beat of drums echoing through the air. The captives were laid on obsidian slabs, their chests sliced open with flint knives, and their still-beating hearts torn out, lifted high to the blazing sun. Streams of blood cascaded down the temple steps, pooling in the square below. Then, as Bernardino Diaz, Florentine Codex, record, the bodies were thrown down, dismembered, and sometimes cooked for ritual cannibal feasts, consumed by the nobility. The evidence of this cruelty remains undeniable. Archaeological digs in Mexico City have unearthed massive skull racks and pantlith, once displayed thousands of human heads. These were not mere symbols, but real monuments to terror, designed to remind every visitor and vassal that the Mexica gods demanded flesh. Historiadores, así en Aztec warfare, writes, the empire maintained itself through ritualized terror. The skull racks were not just decoration, they were warnings. Michael Harner, in The Enigma of Aztec Sacrifice, argued that cannibalism was not simply symbolic but widespread, with nobles consuming human flesh after great festivals. As a demonstration of dominance for the surrounding peoples, the Aztec state was not just oppressive, it was monstrous. This explains why the Tlaxcalans, Totonacs, and many others hated the Aztecs with a passion that cannot be overstated. Every festival inn was their nightmare. Every tribute demand could mean their sons and daughters being marched to the altars. Hugh Thomas, in Conquest, Montezuma, and the Fall of Old Mexico, underscores the point. The Mexica Empire was not bound by loyalty, but by fear, and that fear was always the fear of sacrifice. When arrived, he represented more than Spain, he represented opportunity. The Totonacs joined him quickly, followed by the Tlaxcalans, who after initial battles realized that alliance with the Spaniards was the only hope of ending Aztec terror. Tens of thousands rallied to his side. Without them, the conquest would have been impossible. With them, it became inevitable. Moctezuma too, the emperor, faced these events paralyzed by superstition. Haunted by prophecies of returning gods, he welcomed with gifts of gold, gifts that only fueled Spanish ambition. Soon, Moctezuma was taken hostage in his own palace, a living symbol of how fragile the empire had become once fear began to break down. But the empire still fought back. In 1520, during the festival of Huitzilopochtli, the Spaniards, terrified of revolt, massacred Aztec nobles. Inside the sacred precinct, the city erupted, and his men barely escaped during the infamous Noche Triste. As they fled across the causeways, Aztec warriors rained down spears and arrows, dragging men from the bridges, drowning them in the lake. Hundreds of Spaniards and thousands of native allies died, their bodies torn apart in the very rituals they had feared. sacrificed on the altars of the Templo Mayor in a macabre reversal of fortune. Bernal recounted the horror. We saw the Spaniards being sacrificed, their chests opened, their hearts torn out. Their blood ran down the steps as the drums of Huitzilo sit, filling us with dread. It was as though the Spaniards had been trapped in the very nightmare the native allies had endured for generations. Yet even this catastrophe did not break the coalition. The Tlaxcalans sheltered the survivors, and soon the alliance returned stronger than before. With Spanish steel, Tlaxcalan fury, and the devastation of smallpox, they prepared for the final reckoning. The siege of 1521 was relentless. Spanish brigantines dominated the lake, cutting off supplies. Day after day, Tlaxcalan warriors stormed the causeways. Inside the city, famine drove the Aztecs to desperation. They ate weeds, leather, even corpses, as chroniclers record. But there was no salvation. Slowly, inexorably, was strangled. Before we go further, take a second to subscribe. These deep reconstructions of history, the horror, the resistance, the truth behind myths take countless hours of research to bring alive. By subscribing, you ensure more stories like this can be told. So, join us and be part of uncovering history's raw reality. By August 1521 was finished. The magnificent city was reduced to a corpse, its canals clogged with bodies, its temples toppled, its people broken, but now remembered. The stench was so great that even we, hardened by war, could scarcely endure it. The drums of sacrifice had fallen silent forever. The empire of the Mexica, built on blood, had been consumed by its own cruelty. Modern romantic betrayals often soften the image of the Aztecs, focusing on their architecture, their art, or their astronomy. But the testimony of both Spanish chroniclers and indigenous allies reminds us that this was a regime of terror, one that devoured its own people. Miguel, in Aztec thought and culture, emphasized the psychological toll. To live under the Mexica was to live under the shadow of sacrifice. Generations prayed for the day the sun would rise without blood. That day came with the fall of. The lesson is clear. No empire, no matter how dazzling, can endure if it rests upon rivers of blood. The Spaniards were brutal conquerors, but they were also the spark for an indigenous rebellion that had long awaited its chance. As Matthew Restall notes in 7 Myths of the Spanish Conquest, the fall was not Spaniards against millions, it was millions against the Mexica, with Spaniards at their side. And so, the fall of the Aztecs was not just conquest, it was the revenge of countless peoples who had seen their families butchered and consumed. It was the shattering of an empire whose glory was a mask for horror. It was the silence of the drums of sacrifice, and the end of a civilization that had tried to build eternity on the flesh of the living.